How far is too far? The city's been overrun, and there's talk of military involvement. Jan and Sam agree it might be for the best. This week, Tate continues his rampage. I'm your narrator, Chad, and this is episode 21, chapter 25 of No Evil. Let's escape.
The Prime Minister says his government is hesitant to send in military personnel at this juncture, but admitted bases in the area are on standby. Meanwhile, city police, OPP, and RCMP units continue to work collaboratively too.
Kahir switched off the radio. Tate was driving and turned to his father and smiled. That's right, my boy. They won't see us coming.
We need to call them my people.
Right you are. Where shall we do it?
Somewhere high.
The streets were strewn with debris, trash, overturned cars, glass, but Tate put out a call for them to clear his path. The car rolled slowly through the streets. Men, women, and children with bloodied faces and ragged clothes pushed forward in front of them, moving it all aside. The fires in the city's east end were enormous and fueled by industrial chemicals, but they hadn't advanced as far west. Luckily, the west wind blew the toxic smoke and encouraged the fires to grow in the opposite direction. Nevertheless, the downtown core was filled with a choking haze. It was dark, and the headlights were solid beams. Here, the fires were localized to just a few buildings. Tate had his pick. Whichever building he wanted to push his message from, he could have it. Then, as the car rolled through an intersection, he saw the perfect spot. The headquarters of the public broadcaster wasn't the tallest building in the area, but Tate thought it would send the right message.
This is it.
The doors were locked, but Tate had no problem getting in. The doors shrank and croaked until they were gone. He stepped in, followed by his entourage of Kahir, Sierra, and Jeff. A security guard wielding a taser stepped out from behind a corner. Stay back! Get out! Tate concentrated, and the taser became molten plastic in the man's hand. He screamed in agony, but the shrill cry was muted as Sierra plunged a corkscrew through his temple. Then they piled into the elevator and rode to the top floor. Where to now, Tate, my boy? Where do we send God's grand message? For a moment, Tate contemplated broadcasting his ideas in the traditional sense. There were cameras here, he was sure of that, but he'd never tested his powers through video. Instead, he decided to keep his focus localized to the city. The rest of the world could wait.
The roof.
Tate slammed one fist into the padlocked door, and it careened off its hinges and into the room. The door came to a rest next to a set of stairs leading to the roof access. They gathered on the roof, and Tate stepped to the edge. His eyes scanned the ground below. Through the smoke he could see the flicker of flames. He concentrated and pushed as hard as he could. He told them that Judgment Day is close, and to douse the flames for now. He told them to gather their arms. They had a new mission.
Come together at the edge of the city.
All around the city, the corpses stopped and listened, their heads tilted toward the sky. Tate's mouth glowed with visible white light. As each word echoed through the city, the light began to extend from his mouth. A massive tongue of white, as bright as the sun, lit the city and lapped it like a dog drinks from a bowl. Sam was sitting wide awake when the voice bloomed from his dark thoughts. Across from him, Jan bolted up and looked worriedly to Sam. Case burst out of the bedroom, and Sam could hear the girls crying. What is it? Has he found us? Jan said. I don't think so. It sounds like he's ordering that group somewhere. Sam said. He said outside the city. How could he know we're here? Case asked. I'm not sure that he does. Sam said. The conversation was halted, seemingly, by the rising sun. Outside, the sky became as bright as day, but the light was different. It wasn't a yellow light, like the sun. It was a brilliant white. Everything took on a different tone. The snow seemed to amplify it, and even through the shaded windows they were forced to shield their eyes. How long was I asleep? Jan asked. This isn't daylight. He could see a film on the light. It wasn't clean. It was manipulated. It came from the other place. Sam could never be certain this wasn't God, but he damn sure thought it was unlikely. Something about the light, about the creatures, told him it wasn't true. He thought of what he'd seen in the mirror, and the hair on his arm stood up. They stepped outside the cabin, and the entire lake was illuminated as if it were midday. Neighbors across the finger of ice turned on their porch lights and came out. They stared at the sky. The march was on. Tate watched as the city drained of people like a bathtub drains of water. They clogged the city streets and shuffled along shoulder to shoulder. Tate had never seen such a sight in all his life. He had done it. He had orchestrated this glorious thing. The thought filled him with pride. "You're doing the right thing here, my boy. The right thing. Let me tell you, I felt low in my life, lower than a dog to the ground. But now, I feel like I did the right thing those years back. With you." Tate snapped his head back toward his father, then shook it.
You locked me away.
"You, better than anyone else, should realize it was for your own good." Tate grabbed his father's collar, but thought again. It wouldn't be proper to ruin such a holy day. The march on the fortress, the battle for the city's souls. This would be scripture one day. If the earth were born again, perhaps. He let his father go. "We best get on the road, Tate," Kahir said tamely. "We'll have to lead 'em."
Yes. They mustn't see us coming.
Another push, harder again. This time he planted the seed that all communications towers must go. Cellular, satellite, radio, anything that could betray their position was to be destroyed. Just as he finished the thought, a helicopter whipped by the building. A spotlight shone down from it to the streets. "We can't have that," Kahir said. Tate had never felt so taxed after using his abilities. Now he was doubled over, feeling like his insides were on fire. He wasn't sure if he had enough strength for one more command, but he focused hard on Jeff.
Take down the helicopter.
Jeff nodded. The helicopter was hovering above a 6-lane highway just outside the building. It was following every step Tate's disciples made. Jeff's glossy eyes scanned the rooftop. Then he marched over toward a tower extending from the roof and began to climb. After about 30 feet, Jeff stopped. He latched onto a small satellite dish, tore it from its base. The momentum and the weight of the satellite carried Jeff backward off the tower. Without any betrayal of emotion, at the thought of plummeting to the ground, Jeff turned in the air and hurled the satellite in the direction of the helicopter. His legs hit the edge of the roof, and the collision drove his head into the side of the building. Nobody watched him fall. The satellite seemed to float in slow motion in its arc toward the rotor. With a deafening scree, the motor came apart. Shards of the rotor blade were sent in every direction. The helicopter spun wildly above the slithering streets, each scale another of the dead. The tail of the craft slashed a hole in the side of the building adjacent to Tate. He stood on the ledge watching, and it fell to the ground and detonated into a ball of flame. Tate watched as hundreds of thousands of his followers marched toward the edge of the city. One of them saw the flames of the helicopter, jumped from the highway overpass and to the roadway below. Her leg bones shattered instantly on landing, but she hobbled toward the helicopter regardless. She entered the flames, and there was a flash of white light. 3 people engulfed in flame exited with their rescuer. Then they began to march again. Still hundreds of thousands more stayed behind in the city, dismantling any means of communication they came across. Tate gathered himself. He felt empty inside. All at once he was ravenous. The hunger and the emptiness coexisted in one mosaic of desire.
We need to find food.
"We've so much to do, we can't stop now." Kahir's annoyed tone changed quickly as his eyes met Tate's. "There is a commissary in the building. I saw it." The burgers were 2 days old and the buns were stale, but Tate downed 3. He hadn't eaten since his journey began. Kahir snacked on bourbon and fries. Sierra looked on without blinking.
Where did you get that?
"Oh, this?" Kahir held up the bottle. "This I found in a drawer. Little sniff shouldn't hurt, eh, my boy?" He extended the bottle to Tate, and Tate slapped it to the ground. The bottle exploded into shards and showered them in Kentucky's finest. "What in the hell did you do that for?" "Just a sip's all I wanted. You owe me that much." Tate didn't bother to speak. He was afraid of what he might do. Instead, he just wagged a finger at his father and took another bite of hamburger. When they finished eating, They took the elevator back to the ground floor. Sierra led the way. Tate felt his strength building again, but he didn't need any surprises just yet. Ahead, Sierra stopped, her head turned toward the building's face. "Well, what is it?" Tate walked forward and saw what captured Sierra's attention. It was Jeff, what was left of him, looking like a piece of chewed gum on the concrete. Tate nearly gagged as Jeff twitched and roiled, trying to stand on his own feet.
Your time has come, Jeff.
Tate knelt to Jeff's side and placed a hand on him. A ball of white light floated gently from him, and Tate swallowed it eagerly. His feeling of fatigue was cured instantly. Tate looked remorsefully upon Jeff. Had he waited to push the message when he was at full strength, Tate might have been able to save him. Tate turned his attention sharply and angrily toward his car. Suddenly it seemed beneath him. He'd have to correct that. After. First, Tate had to have full control of the city, and in the full attention of the country. They got in the sedan and used the side streets to get ahead of the group. It took them longer than an hour to make it to the city limits. When they did, Tate parked the car on the shoulder, walked to the middle of the road and waited. An hour passed. Tate didn't flinch. In the darkness he couldn't see them, but he could hear them. A low rumble, the sound of 200,000 footsteps in unison. Out of the shadow a wall of faces appeared. Tate directed them to pick up the pace, and he pointed toward a marsh. It was frozen. The force's base was one of the largest in the country. Security was tight. A 12-foot chain-link fence topped with razor wire wrapped around the perimeter. Guards were stationed on patrols along each quadrant of fence line. There was only one flaw as Tate saw it, a stormwater drain pipe. They entered the marsh and slunk low, almost to their knees. Tate instructed them to take every step cautiously. The result was slow, but effectively silent movement through the high cattails. The marsh opened up into a small inlet, the mouth of which led to the lake. The base backed onto a steep, rocky face a few meters above the beach. The drain pipe was across the inlet from the marsh. It was about a meter in diameter, more space than they would need. However, there was a problem Tate hadn't anticipated. The inlet was bathed in warm yellow light from the base. A spotlight was trained on the pipe, and the guards looked out into the frozen lake. Tate concentrated hard. He imagined the guards' necks snapping without sound. They did. Then he gripped them in his mind and pulled them inconceivably fast toward the fence. Without sound, the fence diced the bodies into uniform diamonds, and the slurry of flesh and blood stained the brightly lit ice below. Tate considered destroying the light, but thought it might attract more attention. Instead, he bolted quickly for the drain pipe, telling the others to stay put. The end was covered with a mesh of rebar. Tate thought of rust. He focused, paying particular attention to the welded joints. The pipe turned orangish red and corroded to the point where it nearly fell off without Tate lifting a finger. Then he pulled firmly and the rebar mesh came away from the end of the pipe. He crawled in. Tate crawled through 300 meters of dank. When he got to the end, he reached an ice-covered steel grate. He focused on the ice and snow and it melted away, then pushed the grate up. He poked his head up into the base. He was about a kilometer from a hangar at the base of a large depression in an otherwise empty field. Tate stayed low and contemplated his next move. The pipe wasn't big enough for them to effectively stage an attack from it. It would focus their numbers advantage into a small space and actually give the men guarding the base a good chance of defending it. No, Tate couldn't risk it. Another look out of the grate, and Tate saw a large plane being fueled. It wasn't far, substantially closer than the hangar. He didn't need another second to decide what to do. Tate focused on the plane and envisioned it lifting in the air. It rose slowly, and he concentrated harder. Men outside the fuel truck backed away in shock. The fear in the men fueled his adrenaline, and the plane shot in the air, tail first. A loud snap and a whipping sound, and the fuel truck was sent cartwheeling through the air, dousing the entire surrounding area with aviation fuel. The plane rose until it couldn't be seen, then Tate balled his outstretched hands into fists and drove them down. The plane screamed audibly toward the ground. The men who had been fueling it ran toward the hangar, screaming and waving their arms. All at once, the screaming stopped, and the plane connected with the ground just outside the base's main gates. An immense fireball lit the sky and flattened the security fence.
Go now.
With Tate's order, they moved. Hundreds of thousands of the saved ran at top speed toward the base. Half reached the rocky face at the other side of the inlet and scrambled up to the chain-link fence. Tate was already there and disintegrated the fence into zinc dust. They flowed past him in the snow like a pebble in rapids. The other half had been crouched alongside the road while the others crouch-walked through the marsh. They reached the wreckage of the plane in full flight and didn't bother to go around it. The flames ignited thousands of them as they stormed the base. In the mad scramble, military personnel skittered into groups and began firing wildly into the wall of fiery bodies. Just as they were about to be overtaken, another wave of soldiers showed up in support. They fired round after round into the rushing mass, but every one that fell got right back up. Soldiers shared shouts of disbelief as they fired repeatedly into the skulls of people running toward them. They continued to back away and fire, but the crowd continued to run toward them. Then the retreat was on. The soldiers realized it was futile to spray bullets into them and turned and ran. Out of the snow-covered field behind them emerged another storming assemblage of ragged-looking civilians. The soldiers lined back to back and emptied their clips. The two waves slammed together. Tate watched from the edge of the pond. His father strolled up behind him. His smile beamed, and his eyes were bright in the darkness. "We did it, my boy. You and I. What a team the O'Byrnes make." Cahir was nearly clicking his heels, but Tate was sullen. "What is it? What's wrong?"
That's not enough.
"What isn't?"
Soldiers.
"Well, Tate, how many is enough? There must be damn near 7,000 of them there." "We'll get them all. Don't you worry." Tate heard the shot, but not until it was too late. The bullet lodged itself in his shoulder. The pain was hot and intense, and he fell backward. The sound of machine guns rattled in bursts. The bullets hit the ground next to him, expelling clumps of earth like comet tails. Cahir drove to the grate and climbed down into the pipe. Tate was stunned and afraid to move. He found the strength to roll to his stomach, and the bullets showered down around him again. He took off into the distance. It was almost imperceptible, but he saw movement. Now anger welled in him, and he concentrated on the ground in front of him. The frozen ground appeared to lose its consistency and rolled like a fluid wave. The ground grew into a tsunami and swallowed everything in its path. Two men who'd been firing at Tate leapt from the snow and sprinted in the opposite direction, but the earth swallowed them up. Then the earth settled back in place. The sound of steel hitting flesh and suffering cries filled the battlefield. Tate crawled on his belly toward the grate. Then a great, deafening explosion hit. Tate felt the heated pressure wave whip past him as he collapsed down the grate and into the pipe. "Son! Oh, thank the Lord you're on this side of the sod." Cahir rushed to Tate's side. Tate pushed him away. Through the grate they could see the sky. It was filled with tar-black smoke. Tate fought the urge to look out again. Guns continued to fire. Cahir looked nervously to the cross around his neck. Tate looked to his own. Marching footsteps approached the end of the pipe. Tate had to act quickly. The soldiers advanced, then hunkered down in positions on either side of the drain pipe. Tate concentrated. The soldiers fired a stun grenade into the pipe. Cahir doubled over and covered his ears. Tate was already doing the same. The soldiers were rushing the end of the pipe. Tate had just seconds. He heard a round slam into the end of the drain behind him. "Damn it, boy. Do something," Cahir said. Tate was frozen with fear and couldn't find his power. He fumbled his thoughts. They were jumbled through the rush of adrenaline. From out of smoke, a gun barrel appeared. Men, two abreast, trained their guns on Tate. As they were about to fire, the gun slid out of their hand, rotated in the air, and fired at them. At least 20 soldiers dropped to the ground in unison. Tate caught his breath. Shit! They got me!" Cahir was rolling in a ball on his back. Blood pooled around his arm. Tate knew they didn't have much time. He heard voices shouting and the sound of a helicopter. Another great explosion cracked above them and echoed painfully through the pipe. Cahir pushed himself to his feet and ran toward the bodies. He booted them furiously. "Shoot me? Is that it? Shoot me?" Cahir mumbled as he pulled back his leg for another kick.
That's enough.
Cahir stopped mid-kick and looked back to Tate with a conciliatory shrug. The gunfire was coming more irregularly now.
My followers.
"Yes, I'm sure they're fine," Cahir chuffed as he held tight his bleeding arm. Tate decided to chance it and stuck his head out of the pipe again. The carnage was vast, expansive. Bodies were strewn in clumps of limbs across the field. The snow was scorched with fire and blood. A small group of soldiers was still moving about the wreckage, still firing into the mob. The group of followers Tate had come with was reduced by half at least. The explosion seemed to have struck in the center of them as they surrounded a crater. On either side of it, the men, women, and children were burned. Some were still on fire. Then the helicopter came up on another pass. A rocket fired from its side and spilt more gelatinous blood. Tate focused on the helicopter. He had time now. He could concentrate. The feeling of a groove returned, and it was well-oiled and ran smooth. The helicopter arced overhead, turning around and back toward the group. Tate pictured revenge in his mind. The helicopter crumpled like a paper ball. An explosion started, but was immediately snuffed out. It hit the ground and rolled toward the remaining living soldiers. They dove out of the way, but were immediately swarmed by the dead. Once again, the field seemed quiet. Tate climbed the rest of the way under the drain and collapsed on the snow. He was drained. He tried to push, tried to signal his father that he needed help, but sleep came on quickly. That's all for episode 21, chapter 25 of No Evil. If you're enjoying the podcast, let us know what you think in the comments. Give us a like, a share, a dandy au pair. Do all the social media things. Become an escapist by subscribing and clicking the bell. And you know what else you could do? You could ask AI what's an unlikely yet humorous way to notify people to watch AV Escapes, and it might say something like, if you don't watch my YouTube channel, the aliens monitoring Earth's internet will have no choice but to abduct you for questioning why you missed out on such epic content. Yep, that's what it said. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the next escape.